Alrighty, let's talk about Christmas morning. So the whole game, Perfect Christmas Game, leads up to Christmas morning, and the goal is to have the most unopened presents on Christmas morning. Now, we've talked about there being other ways to impact that final score, and it's going to be called the final tally. Reason for the season decorations will increase your final tally, and there's some cards like the lump of coal that will decrease your final tally. But in large part, on Christmas morning, you want to be the player with the most unopened presents in your home. So, Christmas morning is just a card like any other. It's got that dark green background, and on the front, it's got special instructions, and it will say it's technically a Christmas spirit card, although it's got its own colored banner there. Now, there are 3 Christmas morning cards in the deck. If you want a slightly longer game, you can take one out at the beginning of the game before setup and just keep it in the box. So there's only 2. The more Christmas morning cards in the deck, the more frequently it's going to be the case that somebody can play one and potentially trigger the end of the game. So you can have that card in your hand like any other card. Now that doesn't mean you can always draw it and keep it in your hand, but there is no rule against having a Christmas morning card in your hand if it got there legally. Now, you can get a Christmas morning card at the beginning of the game when you're drawing your initial 5 cards, or you may have various opportunities throughout the game to sift through the Christmas cards deck and take a card of your choice, so you can get one that way. There are a couple rules, though, limiting when you can get a Christmas morning card. If at any time during normal gameplay you draw a Christmas morning card from the top of your deck at the beginning of your turn, you must play it. So let's just run through this as a quick example. I'm going to set this one aside. Let's just pretend I didn't have it. It's the start of my turn. I do not have another Christmas morning card in my hand. I could draw a present, but if I draw this Christmas morning card, I must play it, and then we'll start going through the instructions that are triggered when that's played. So real quickly, let's just pretend I didn't do that. Let's say I already had one in my hand, say from the start of the game. Now, you're never allowed to have 2 Christmas morning cards in your hand at a time. You can have one if you acquired it legally. Now let's talk about how you might even be in a situation where you could have 2, which again is not allowed. So let's say it's my opponent's turn and they play a card that forces me to draw another card, a Christmas card specifically. It's Christmas morning on the top of the deck. I have to draw a card. So what I would do is take that card because I have to follow the instructions, but I can't have 2. And so the rule book does say if it's not your turn and you acquire a second Christmas morning card, put it back on the top of the deck. That might seem a little silly because I just took it from the top of the deck and put it back in there. But there are occasions where, for instance, I might be given a random card from the Christmas cards deck. And if that happened on my opponent's turn, let's say he randomly gives me Christmas morning, well, I can't have that. So I would put it on the top of the deck. That is one way that you could acquire a second Christmas morning card. Now, if it was my turn and I drew this, I would have to play it. Not only because I already have one, but because anytime you draw Christmas morning from the top of the deck at the beginning of your turn, you must play it. Now, there are other occasions on your turn when you might draw a card. I might start my turn by drawing a present, but then I might play a card. Let's say I open a present that says, draw 3 Christmas cards. Now, if I draw 3 Christmas cards, one of them is going to be Christmas morning. So I would take all 3 into my hand, as I was told to do, but I can't keep that second one. So in that case, I would have to play that immediately. So that is what the rule book says. If it's during your turn and you acquire a second Christmas morning card in any way, do play it immediately. Discontinue any other current or pending actions. So for instance, in this case, we said that I opened a present that had me draw 3 Christmas morning cards. Once I get that in my hand and play it, ignore anything else that was on that present. Maybe it would have said, and then have your opponent draw cards as well. And then open up another present. You would ignore all that. Once Christmas morning is played, you discontinue any current or pending actions and you start processing Christmas morning. And we'll talk about what that means in just a moment. So what actually happens when you play Christmas morning? Now we're going to rewind a little bit from our previous example. We're going to say I already have 1 Christmas morning card in my hand. it's my turn and I decide to draw another Christmas morning card. So I'm playing that immediately. Those are the rules. I can't have two. And I also have to play that since it's my turn and I took it from the top of the deck at the start of my turn. So playing Christmas morning. Now what happens? Immediately discontinue all other current or pending actions. This means I'm no longer going to have an option to play another card, although I technically did play a card. Anything else that might have been pending is canceled. In this case, there wasn't anything. And as soon as that's played, every player has to open one unopened present from their home. That's the first step. So as with all things, when every player is required to do something and it doesn't specifically give you instructions otherwise, you start with the current player. So I would go ahead and open an unopened present. Actually, in this case, chemistry set causes me to blow up 3 of my unopened presents. I didn't know that was coming. So I would take 3 unopened presents, and I could choose which ones, and I would have to throw them into the discard pile. Okay, so I've got one left here now, not too great. Now it's my opponent's turn. He's got to open one unopened present, and he's only got one. So he opens that, and we perform those actions, and we discard. Now, I've only got 2 players here, so it's easy to keep track of. At this point, after everybody's opened their first unopened present, you go around and you see, does everybody have at least one present left in their home? If they do, we will go to what's called the final countdown, right? And that's where it gets kind of fun and wild. But in this case, my opponent has no presents in his home on Christmas morning, so that's not too happy. And when that happens, we're going to say Christmas morning is, let's just say, canceled. It's not happening. You know, you want everybody you know to have at least one present in their home on Christmas morning. So in this case, we're going to take Christmas morning, we're going to shuffle it back into the deck. In this occasion, it can't be the top card when you're done shuffling. So if I were to shuffle these cards up real good and I shuffle them and then I stick them back, oops, it's on top. Just give them another quick cut or shuffle it really so you can't see where it ends up. And as long as it's not on the top of the deck, you're in good shape. My turn is over. It would go to my opponent now to start their turn as per normal. And we will not go through that process again until the next player plays a Christmas morning card. Now there's 3 in the deck, so it might happen quickly or it might be another 10 minutes or so before the next player plays it. I've actually still got one in my hand, so I can just play that on my next turn. But it probably wouldn't be wise because my opponent's unlikely to have 2 presents in his home at the start of his next turn. In fact, he can't because you can only play 1 per turn. But I want him to have at least a few presents in his home on Christmas morning so that we can get to the final countdown. Now, I don't have very many either, so it might not be smart. I'm going to hang on to that one for a while, that Christmas morning card, until I can build up my collection again. We'll talk about the final countdown in a moment, but just know that when Christmas morning is first played, you go through that first step. Everybody opens a present, but you're not really going to trigger the end of the game unless everybody has at least 1 present, and we'll talk about that next. All right, let's talk a little bit about the final countdown and the final tally and how this game actually ends. Now, I'm going to run through very quickly again just an example of playing Christmas morning and going through that first step where everybody opens at least 1 unopened present. So I play Christmas morning on my turn. I open a present. Let's say it doesn't do too much. My opponent opens a present. Let's say nothing happens really impactful. Now we take a look at everybody's home and we say, does everybody have at least 1 open present in their home? If they do, we enter what we're calling the final countdown. And this will trigger the end of the game. There's no going back after this. So what happens in the final countdown? Now, we're going to move in turns, again, keeping the same order of turns as we had during the game. And every player will have the option to either open a present or not. And you'll kind of see how this works if we work through an example. So in this case, I am clearly outstripping my opponent. In the present count, I've got 5, he's only got 2. So as the final countdown starts, and because I'm the current player, I played Christmas morning after all, I'm the current player, I'm going to say I don't want to open any of my unopened presents. I want to keep all of these for the final tally, and that is at the end when we count our presents and say, I've got the most, I win. Now my opponent here also has the option to open a present or not. If he doesn't, he's just going to lose because it's 2-5 and I win. So he has every incentive to try to open a present, and maybe he'll get one that knocks me off my high horse a little bit. So let's just say he opens a present. And let's pretend that that present causes me to, let's just say, lose 3 of my presents. Now, there's not actually a card that does that specifically, but let's just pretend. Now, we're still in the final countdown. I've had my turn to open a present or not. I declined. He had his turn to open a present or not, and he did. Now, if at least one person opened a present, then you do another round. So in this case, I'm still up 2-1, and I'm going to say, no, I don't want to open a present. Now, every round you can decide anew. I could open one if I wanted, even though last round I didn't. Likewise, my opponent could opt not to, even though last round he did. So every round you can decide anew whether to open a present or not. Now, I'm not going to open one on this round. Let's say my opponent gets over here and he says, well, you know what, if he declines, he loses because it's 1-2. So he may as well just open a present again. Now let's say he opens a present, and again, we're just going to pretend here. Let's say that that causes me to lose my 2. His present says your opponent has to discard 2 presents. Again, there's not really a card that says that, but let's just pretend. So now you can see how it was advantageous for him to open presents during that final countdown and try to knock me, off the king of the mountain there. And he did so in this example. So it comes around again to me. I don't actually have any presents to open at this point. He doesn't have any presents to open at that point. So both of us would technically decline the option to open a present here. And the final countdown would now be said to be over. So that final countdown round is over at any time when every player says, nope, I don't want to open a present, or I don't have any presents. After the final countdown, it's time to tally it up. So, final tally. Final tally comes after the final countdown. And now we're just going to look at, in this case, our homes and say, how many presents do we have now? I don't have any, and my opponent doesn't have any. But in this case, I do have a reason for the season decoration, and that gives you a +1 on your present total. My opponent has no such additions or subtractions to make to their total. So I would win the game by a score of 1-0. There are also cards that can deduct from your final tally. I believe Lump of Coal deducts a few points, and there might be a couple other cards that do so as well. So you just have to holistically look at all your cards, count up your presents, factor in any additions, any subtractions, and that is your final tally. And the player with the highest final tally at that point wins the game. Now, during those final countdown rounds, you perform all the actions on presents as though you were opening them during the normal course of gameplay. Most actions will still pertain to what's going on. Some will not. If there is an action that can't be followed because it only pertains to elements of normal gameplay, that action is just skipped. So for instance, during that final countdown round, and we can kind of lay it out here again, players are not drawing a card at their beginning of their turn, and that players are not discarding down to 5 at the end of those rounds. All they're doing is opening a present and following those actions. But if a present that you open says draw 4 Christmas cards, you can still go ahead and draw 4 Christmas cards. If a present says play 2 presents from your hand, then into your home, then you can go ahead and do so. If an action on a present that you open says the next player skips their turn, well, then they skip their turn of that final countdown. So just do your best to interpret any actions that you're asked to take in the context of these final countdown rounds, knowing that these are not quite normal turns, but that most actions will still apply without needing to be adjusted or reinterpreted. So there's just one final scenario to run through on Christmas morning. Now, let's assume we've played Christmas morning, and everybody opened a present, and everybody still had at least one present in their home. And then we went to the final countdown, and everybody had the option to either open a present or not on their turn. And you get to a point here in this scenario where I've got 3 presents and my opponent has 3 presents, and neither of us want to open a present during the final countdown. Okay, that's our right to do. So the final countdown's over, but we're tied. In this case, you'll see I took away that decoration I had with the reason for the season card. So really, there's nothing else to factor in. It's just 3 to 3. So what do you do when there's a tie on the final tally? You're just going to keep opening presents. So in rounds, every player must open a present. So even if we had some more players playing and they did not have as many presents as us, every player opens a present. So in this case, I open one. We perform the actions. My opponent opens one. We perform the actions. And we get back to me and we say, okay, well, it's still tied. So now what do we do? Well, now everybody has to open another present. But in this case, we're going to rotate who goes first in these rounds. So if there were other players, we would just rotate around. In this case, we only have myself and my opponent. So now he's going to open a present. And maybe he gets lucky and his present says that your opponent must discard a present. Okay, we do that. But since he went first in that round, now I still have to open a present. I do so, I perform the actions, I put it down. That round is over, so we take another final tally, and now my opponent's got one unopened present left, so he's the winner. And that is how the game ends on Christmas morning. So from the time that Christmas morning is first played, and you go through a round where everybody must open a present, and then you go through the rounds of a final countdown where you may or may not choose to open a present as seems strategically best to you. And then you take, the final tally. And if there's ties on the final tally, everybody must open a present. So you can see how, as you're playing the game and amassing as many unopened presents as you possibly can, at the end of the game, often people are going to be opening quite a few presents. Things can get a little chaotic with what those actions are doing. And at the very end, it's a little bit of a last man standing kind of deal where ultimately it's not that everybody else will be out of presents, but when you finally get to a point in the final tally when there's a single player with the highest final tally, ultimately that player is the winner. If you get to a spot in the final tally where nobody has any presents left, then and nobody's got any reason for the season decorations or anything else, and the score is just tied and nobody can perform any other actions, at that point we can say everybody wins and Merry Christmas.